Okay, this podcast is about the different types of connective tissues within the body. This is Learning Target 2, connective tissues. I would always recommend split screening with Notability when watching this podcast and having your own notes open as we go. The notes for this unit would just be called Unit 2, Tissues and Integumentary System Notes. And you can download those from Schoology. First, let's start by talking about some general characteristics of connective tissues. First, connective tissues are found everywhere in the body. So they're all over. They're the most abundant type of tissues. They function to provide protection, they help to bind other tissues together, and they give our body some support. Blood supply for connective tissues can vary. Some are very well vascularized. Very well vascularized means a really good blood supply. Lots of blood vessels traveling through it. And then some are avascular, which means no blood, much like our epithelial tissues we already learned about. And then some have a poor blood supply, so not a lot. Another characteristic of connective tissues is they are all composed of something called matrix. Matrix is a non-living material that surrounds the cells of connective tissue. Matrix is composed of two different things, a ground substance. This ground substance is mostly water and some proteins. I always picture it kind of like a slightly denser version of water, a little bit thicker version of water. And then the matrix also contains some fibers. So these could be collagen fibers, elastic fibers, or reticular fibers. And depending on the connective tissue, some have barely any fibers, and then some have a lot of fibers. Okay, if you look at the scale that we have down at the bottom of the slide, we are going to rank our connective tissues from least rigid to most rigid. Now, what does rigid mean? Least rigid, these are the ones with the least amount of matrix. So these are going to be the most fluid, the softer of the connective tissue. And then the most rigid is going to be the ones with the most matrix. So blood has the least amount of matrix, and this should make sense because blood is a liquid. So there are no fibers running through it, very few fibers running through it, so it's a liquid. And then as you increase all the way up to the most matrix, that would be bone. So if you think about how rigid bone is, that should make sense because the matrix, the amount of fibers that are running through bone is very high, which makes it so rigid. And we'll talk about each of these and the amount of matrix that they have in the next coming slides. Okay, if you're following along with me with your flashcards, now would be the time you would want to take those flashcards out. If you cut out your flashcards, and we usually color the connective tissue flashcards blue. So you're looking for your blue flashcards. If you don't have your flashcards, that's okay. You could just follow along with your notes. Your flashcard for blood should look like this. You see little dots on it. So let's talk about the function of blood first. The function is to transport things around our body. So nutrients, waste, and gases, they travel around our body through our blood. So blood is really important with that. Now, example or location, well, we know that blood is everywhere, right? It's in all of our blood vessels of our body. An important thing to note about blood is that it has a fluid matrix. So we do not have fibers running through our blood. So if you've ever heard of plasma before, plasma is the clear liquid component of our blood. And this is the matrix of our blood. So it's that clear liquid. And what makes our blood red is just those red blood cells that are floating throughout it. Okay, if we were to look at blood under a microscope, this is what we would see. Usually you just see a bunch of little red blood cells. Occasionally you might get a white blood cell in there as well, but that's what it looks like under a microscope. All right, next we're moving on to a roller tissue. A roller tissue is the second least rigid of the connective tissues. You can see in the image right here, you can see some fibers running through it, but it's mostly open space. It's mostly that ground substance. If you're looking for which flashcard we are using, it is this one. Again, you can see some fibers running through the areolar tissue, but not many. So let's talk about the function of areolar tissue. Areolar tissue absorbs edema. Now, if you're not sure what edema is, that is swelling. So if you've ever had a swollen ankle before or an injury that caused a body part to swell, if you've ever thought to yourself, well, where did all that go? All that swelling, all that fluid that was filling up, the areolar tissue dissolves it and gets rid of it. So that's one function of areolar tissue. It cushions and protects our organs. Okay, and then it also looks like cobwebs. So if we do the pig's foot dissection, you'll actually see it, the areolar tissue, but it looks like cobwebs right under the skin, kind of holding everything together. And again, it's not rigid at all. It's very soft, almost looks fluffy, if you will. And where is this? Well, it's all over our body. It's holding everything together. And if we look at it under the slide, it looks much like the picture. You can see a lot of open space, but some fibers running throughout it, and then of course some cells as well. All right, next we'll talk about adipose tissue. A more common name for adipose tissue is fat. So this is the flashcard you are looking for. You can see it looks like kind of big open spaces, and the picture right up here shows you why it looks like that. If you've ever, drizzled oil in water before or seen olive oil before, you know that it forms little fat droplets, and that's exactly what's in adipose tissue. You have big droplets of fat, and then the nuclei and the cells are kind of pushed to the side. So it ends up looking like bubbles almost. So what does fat do for our body? Well, we could use it as an energy source, but also it insulates us, keeps us warm, and then it also cushions our organs and it gives us a little bit of protection. There's some places on our body that have less adipose than others, and those are a little more sensitive to bumps and bruises because it doesn't have that protection. Where is adipose? Well, it is in a layer called the hypodermis. The hypodermis is a layer that's directly under your skin. Okay, so right under your skin, you kind of have this adipose bodysuit, if you will, that's kind of covering your whole body directly under your skin. So that's your hypodermis, is where your adipose tissue is found. And if you look at this slide again, you kind of see those bubble-shaped structures, those fat droplets, and the cells are kind of pushed to the side. All right, next we're moving on to reticular tissue. Reticular tissue is only found in three places: your lymphoid organ, so your lymph node, your spleen, and your bone marrow. You can see the flashcard looks like this. You can see lots of fibers running through there with the cells, and it forms the framework of these lymphoid organs. And here's a zoomed in picture of the spleen as well. And then if you look at it under a slide, you see a lot more of those fibers, a lot more matrix in reticular tissue. All right, next we have dense, regular connective tissue. There is irregular connective tissue as well, which we'll talk about in a later unit. But for this one, we're going to talk about dense, regular connective tissue. And just as the name indicates, we're getting more into the denser side of the connective tissue, a little bit more matrix. So this slide is what you're looking for. Doesn't look very exciting, but those fibers are very closely packed together, as you can see here. So you're thinking of a much stronger connective tissue here. These are your tendons and your ligaments, your tendons and your ligaments. So tendons are connecting muscle to bone, and your ligaments are connecting bone to bone. We should write that down. So tendons connect muscle. Oh, it's already on the slide. I don't need to write it down. Tendons connect muscle to bones, and ligaments connect bone to bone. Now, something about dense connective tissue is that these are one of the ones that have a very low blood supply. And what does that mean? It actually means that they take a very long time to heal. So if any of you have ever torn a ligament or a tendon, you know that that injury can take a really, really long time to heal. A lot of times it results in surgery or a lot of physical therapy, and the effects of it can even be could even last your whole life because those dense connective tissues does not get a really good blood supply, and blood equals healing. So because of that, they heal really, really slowly. In this image here, you can see it's showing you some tendons and ligaments around the shoulder joint. And you can see again, those fibers are really densely packed in there, which makes tendons and ligaments extremely strong. Here is a picture of a slide of dense connective tissue. Again, really, really tightly packed fibers make it really, really strong, but low blood supply make it heal very slowly. All right, next we have the two different types of cartilage. We're going to start with fibrocartilage. You can find, first of all, the picture looks like this. So you see those little circles within there, those are the cartilage cells themselves, and then you can see the fibers kind of running through, all very tightly packed in there. Okay, so fibrocartilage is located in the discs between our vertebrae. So you can see it in that picture right there. Fibrocartilage is rough to the touch. So if you were to feel fibrocartilage, it's not shiny, it's not smooth, it's very rough to the touch. And it's highly compressible, which means it can take impact very well. Okay, so that's a great place for it to be located between our vertebral discs because we have a lot of impact that's going on there. If we jump off of something, those fibrocartilage discs help protect our vertebrae from banging into each other. And if we look at the slide again, you can see pretty tightly packed fibers within there, and then you can see the little cartilage kind of just scattered throughout the fibers. All right, now we are getting to the most rigid of the connective tissues. We are on another type of cartilage called hyaline cartilage. Now, this cartilage is a little bit different than the fibrocartilage we just talked about. So first, let's find the picture. Okay, so you can see the cartilage cells in there. And now the fibers, the matrix, is so tightly packed in there, it's almost hard to pick up those individual fibers. So when you look at the image here, you can't really see those threads running through it anymore because they're so tightly packed in there, and it makes this a really rigid form of connective tissue. So where do we have cartilage? Well, first of all, it functions as kind of like a pre-bone when we're developing as a fetus. So this is what our skeleton initially forms as hyaline cartilage, and then it's slowly replaced by bone. A lot of times people refer to this as flexible bone. So if you grab just the tip of your nose or your ears and kind of move those around, that is where hyaline cartilage is. So it's firm like bone, but it's a little more flexible. And another thing that hyaline cartilage does is it reduces friction. So the reason why this happens is hyaline cartilage is smooth and shiny. So specifically, in our movable joints, hyaline cartilage helps to reduce friction. So it's not like fibrocartilage. It's not rough to the touch. Hyaline cartilage is smooth and shiny. So it helps to reduce friction. It helps our movable joints glide past each other. If we get the opportunity to dissect a pig's foot or a cow's femur, you will see that shiny white hyaline cartilage. It is on the end caps of all bones with movable joints. It's also makes up our larynx, which is where our vocal cords are. And then you can see in the picture there, it's also part of our ribs as well. Okay, and the most rigid type of connective tissue is, of course, the strongest, which is bone. So bone has a very characteristic structure. You can see those concentric rings that make up the bone tissue. Those rings are of the matrix and they're surrounding a open space, and we'll talk more about that open space when we get to our skeletal unit. but you can see the fibers running in concentric circles, very tightly packed together, making bone extremely strong. It has the most matrix, which makes it the hardest. Bone is extremely well vascularized. That circle in the center that you see right here, okay, actually has a blood vessel running through it. So bone is very well vascularized, which means it can heal quickly. Okay, so if you ever heard that breaking a bone heals faster than like tearing or rupturing a tendon, that's why, because bone is extremely well vascularized. The more blood, the easier it is to heal. And then we also refer to blood as osseous tissue. So when you see that phrase osseous, and we'll see this a lot more when we study the bones, osseous refers to bone. And then lastly, where is it located? Well, it makes up our skeleton and it helps to support our body. And if you look at bone under a slide, it's probably one of the coolest ones to see under a slide. You can see those concentric rings. And again, the circle in the center of those concentric rings is a blood vessel, and the matrix kind of forms these concentric circles, which makes bone extremely tough and rigid and very strong. Thank you for watching this podcast on Learning Target 2, Connective Tissues. Now would be a great time to go to Quizlet and open up this set of Quizlet words and practice them. Both the pictures and the definitions/functions are in there.